we had him on the show in January or February time. He was in love with the Lindor trade. I'm looking forward to hearing what he thought about Lindor. We are now talking to Metsmerized writer and editor, Matt Musico. What's going on, Matt?
Not so much. What's up, fellas? Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We're very happy to get you back on. Definitely waiting for this because the Mets are the talk of the town. It's not the Yankees, but it seems with Steve Cohen, he likes to make a splash, and he did one this past week, adding Buck Showalter to the list of players that he's added to this team. So before we get into that, how have you been doing? Obviously, being that we haven't talked to you for almost 10 months, how's everything going right now with you over there and Metsmerize, the whole art, the whole magazine, the whole website that you're working on right now for the Mets?
Yeah, I mean, everything's going well. Appreciate you asking. I mean, obviously the first half of the regular season was really fun, and the second half was pretty soul crushing. So thankfully, after they finally found Billy Epler, somebody that actually wanted to work in the front office for the Mets, we're able to make some big moves, get people excited again. I mean, there was certainly a period of time where I had to ask myself, probably around September, October, when was the last time I was thinking about being a Met fan and being happy that I was a Met fan? It was probably July. It was the All-Star game, All-Star weekend. Pete Alonso won the Home Run Derby. They drafted Kumar Rocker, and they were in first place, and then everything kind of just snowballed. Well, everything kind of tailspin from there. So, thankful,
including a guy named Rocker, because that tailspin pretty quick too.
yeah. No, everything in complete succession. Everything tailspins, which in typical Mets fashion too. So that wasn't fun, but it's nice to see some optimism again. Because if you can't be optimistic in the off season, then when can you actually be optimistic?
Before we get into the optimistic stuff, because I know Tyler's become a born-again Met fan. I mean, he's a Yankee fan, but he's a born-again Met fan.
I said you did two things right. Two things. I'm a Mets fan. Two things.
He's a born-again.
Two things.
Anyways.
Because you hired a manager that actually knows baseball instead of the moron I have, and you signed the best pitcher in baseball. Good for you. Good for you.
Give me a gun so I could shoot myself in the back of my head.
Here, anyways, grab it under the table.
I think Errol will be smart enough, not if he had a gun, not to just put it right under the table.
No, I wouldn't, especially in Tyler's hands. But anyways, let's get into the Mets. And really,
I'm a safe shot.
In the beginning of the season, I mean, Francisco Lindor just had a horrible year. I mean, first year with the Mets, they gave him $34 million a year. He's the second or third highest paid player in baseball. Now he's probably the fourth because the Mets have two of the top 5 highest paid players in baseball. But that you got the richest owner, so you might as well spend the money, spin the wheel, make the deal with them. But what were your thoughts with Francisco's first year as a New York Met? I always thought that coming to New York, it's a different ball game. It's a different pressure on your on the way you play, and I think it was very smart letting Baez go because I think that would have never worked, especially being that these guys were best friends, and it seemed like the whole thumbs down and starting fights with the Yankees and trying to attack guys that are twice the size of them didn't make any sense. But what were your thoughts with Francisco Lindor's first year as a New York Mets?
Well, I mean, definitely lots of ups and downs, like you said. Certainly a learning process for him. As Mickey Callaway said, Cleveland is certainly not New York. So they're two very different places. I'm sure he took a lot of lessons from all the things that he went through. He's just never able to recover from those awful, awful 2 months that he had to start the year. There was just he would have had to have gotten absurdly hot to just get back to his typical season-long numbers that he had. So I think when a lot of people are looking at what he did in 2021, they just look at his season-long numbers and think, well, he had a terrible year. And yeah, by his standards, he did have a pretty terrible year. But for Mets shortstops, historically speaking, he actually had a pretty decent year. He almost broke the franchise shortstop record for home runs. It was one of he might have been the first shortstop to have 20 homers and 10 stolen bases in the same season, or something like that for the Mets. So there were some positives. He just could never recover. I can't even remember. His WRC plus is probably in like the 60 or 70 range entering into June. But when we look at how he did from June to the end of the year, I can't remember off the top of my head, but his his OPS was pretty much right around his career norms. He was much more the normal player that he was. He just kind of went back to who he was. But to be able to appear as if he was for the whole year, he would have had to have gotten much hotter. But then also September was his best month of the year as well, too. So I liked the idea that he at least was able to recover. And he did a lot of things that probably he shouldn't have done with the whole raccoon thing and then the thumbs down thing and all that kind of stuff. But he learned a lot from all the things that he did. And what I liked is that it didn't seem like his confidence ever wavered in himself, which was how he was able to come back and still just be the normal offensive Francisco Lindor that he was, with the Gold Glove caliber defense as well, too. I tend to think I'm a little bit more on the optimistic side. So I do think that his year overall was better than what the overall stats would look like. I kind of equated to Carlos Beltran's first year with the Mets in 2005. It was very, very similar vibe to me. Record-setting contract, have everything built around him. And in 2005, Carlos Beltran had a terrible year. And people were probably saying all the same things that we're saying about Francisco Lindor right now. And then Beltran ended up becoming the best Mets center fielder they've ever had. So a lot of people are just writing him off and thinking it's a big waste. And obviously, will he live up to the value of his contract? Probably not, because that's a lot of money to live up to. And he's entering the second tier of his career. But I feel like he's got a lot of good years left. And I feel like he's going to be exactly what they need him to be within that lineup eventually. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do next year.
So the Mets did not bring back Javier Baez after trading for him at the trade deadline, but they did bring in 3 other offensive pieces: Starling Marte, Mark Canha, and Eduardo Escobar. And I thought they were all good contracts. I don't think they overpaid for any one of them. So what were your thoughts to those signings? And would you have rather had Baez instead of maybe one of those guys or even 2 of those guys? Are you surprised he only got $130 million from Detroit? Would you have wanted to bring him back instead of one of those guys? And what were your thoughts on those 3 players?
Well, I mean, it kind of all happened very fast. It was like, I think Marte, Canha, and Escobar were all Friday night, the day after Thanksgiving. So like I can't remember which one was first, but I think Escobar was first.
I think Escobar was first, and then Canha was.
Then it was Marte, then Canha.
Then Canha.
Okay, yeah. And like I remember looking at Marte, looking at his numbers at the end of the year, and thinking, man, like he'd be a perfect fit for the Mets. I just didn't expect them to actually go after him and land him as well too. I love the things that they did. None of these 3 guys specifically strike out a ton. They get on base a lot. They seem to do well with runners in scoring position. And thinking about Marte and Nimmo at the top of the Mets lineup every single day, that sounds like a lot of fun. And Marte brings something that the Mets have lacked for the majority of, the past decade, since Jose Reyes left the first time, which was the stolen bases. I think he had 47 stolen bases last year, and the Mets as a team had 52. So just that dynamic, and him getting on base at a high clip, Nimmo getting on base at a high clip, I just feel like there's going to be a really good shot for Pete Alonso to break the Mets single-season RBI record, just because he's going to have so many ducks in the pond at this point. I was a little bit sad about Baez not coming back to New York, just because we were able to really appreciate how good he is just from a purely baseball standpoint.
What a steal by Detroit, by the way. Steal by Detroit.
Oh, yeah.
Steal.
Oh, 100%. What a pivot. Offering Correa $275 million and then getting him for whatever it was, $130, is just terrific. And seeing the progress that he made with his plate discipline specifically, he was still very aggressive, but being able to pick and choose his spots and be a little bit more overall effective. I could see what you're saying about him and Lindor being together, and it may not working in the long term. But I also saw it as if these guys are very competitive, they're best friends, and they may also push each other. So just seeing them together for a full year at least to see what they could do sounded really, really cool and really exciting. So I was sad that they didn't bring him back. I mean, at some point you can't just spend. I mean, Steve Cohen technically could, but you can't just spend $100 million on everybody and bring them all in. So I mean, there's still lots of opportunities for the Mets that are still out there, obviously with Chris Bryant and things like that, but also we don't know what they're thinking about with Jeff McNeil and how he's going to fit into these pieces of the puzzle as well too. So I think they did a really good job for what they're looking for, and they were able to, I agree. I don't think they overpaid for any of them, especially when you look at the projections and predictions that were for all those players at the beginning of the offseason. So I mean, they spent wisely, kind of efficiently, and they boosted areas of the roster that they really needed boosting.
So speaking of spending money, I'll bring it up. The Max Scherzer signing, obviously.
He let you bring it up.
Thank you. The highest AAV in any contract in Major League Baseball history. 37-year-old starting pitcher. I think it's a great idea, especially with the future of DeGrom's health. You don't know what that arm's going to be next year. Historically speaking, he should be fine. But even if Scherzer and DeGrom are at the top of their game, you need 3 other guys that are going to have to pitch for the New York Mets. What are the Mets thinking about with the rest of this rotation?
The thing that they really wanted that didn't actually happen, what we heard after the fact, is that they were pursuing Scherzer and Kevin Gausman at the same time, hoping to land both of them, which would have been ridiculous if they were able to land both of them. Obviously, it didn't happen. They do have a lot of question marks. I mean, when we're talking about each specific guy, Tyler McGill was great in spurts. Taijuan Walker was great in the first half, terrible in the second half. And a lot of people have injury questions as well too. So I think from what we've heard and seen from reports that have come out, that they're still looking for at least one more arm in the rotation, another arm in the bullpen, and one more bat as well too. That seems to be what they're looking for. So a couple of the pitchers that have come up in rumors were like Yusei Kikuchi from the Mariners, and also Carlos Rodon are a couple of arms that they were at least linked to before the lockout happened, which I think could be cool just simply because they both have good qualities, but they're also left-handed. The Mets have no other left-handed starters. They have David Peterson, but he's also a huge question mark as well too. I think it's nice to be able to have at least a couple of different kinds of looks. We don't want to just have a bunch of right-handed pitchers that throw really hard and have hard sliders and stuff like that. I'm going to bring some different looks. And, I don't know how effective that actually could be in the long run, but I would love to get at least one lefty in that rotation and be able to just, throw, if you throw someone like that in between Scherzer and DeGrom in a 3-game series, like that's a lot of different looks. That sounds good to me.
I don't really want to get into the whole Max Scherzer. I don't think it's going to be a problem, but a guy who's going to be 38 in July, he had shoulder problems last year. I don't trust the Mets that they're going to keep this guy healthy, where he's going to be fine. And, it's not the Mets thing where they're going to keep a guy like this. This guy's been healthy practically his whole career, goes to the Mets, and he's going to be, $43 million, who cares? He's just not the same pitcher that he once was. But hopefully that doesn't happen for the Mets fans. But getting back into the Mets, Pete Alonso has been, I believe, the face of this organization. He is the name. He is the piece that everybody keeps talking about, Jacob deGrom. But I've always thought, ever since Pete Alonso came up, he got rid of his social medias. He's been very equivalent with his conversations to the press. He's just pretty straightforward. He when the whole Lindor thing came up, pay Lindor with everything with Javier Baez, with the whole fighting with the Yankees, he backed Javier Baez up. I mean, I have a lot of respect for him. I think he's wrong opening his mouth to the press, because if he doesn't put up, he's going to get smacked around by the press. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts of the growth of Pete Alonso, who I think is a special player for the New York Mets?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say he's the next David Wright for this franchise, but he kind of has that kind of aura about him. I mean, he's really happy to sit down and talk with the media, take responsibility, at certain points when they were in that awful 2-week stretch against the Dodgers and the Giants in August, continue to say that they had everything under control, when they obviously did not. I think 2020 was a really good learning experience for him, because even though his numbers were okay, he did a lot of struggling, and he only really got hot the last week or two of the season. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a big point of growth for him specifically. And he's very clearly invested in being with this team. All the things that he's been talking about, how he speaks to the media, I think he's similar to David Wright, where he can mean that much to the franchise, but also different because he kind of looks a little bit more for the spotlight. Whereas David Wright was happy to talk to the media and take responsibility for stuff, but he was much more of a quiet kind of leader. Like this guy, he wants to create Donnie Stevenson and kind of keep things loose with everyone and all that stuff. He's most certainly a piece for the long-term future. The conversation doesn't have to happen yet on what exactly he's going to look like beyond the next 3-4 years, but he needs to be around. He's the heart and soul, I think, of the team itself. And it's definitely, when we look at the other potential leaders on the club, not counting Max Scherzer coming into it, but you also have DeGrom, who almost never speaks, pretty much. So you want to have somebody that at least can be the face and get up in front of the media, and not that DeGrom can't do that, but he just prefers not to. You want to have somebody that can do that.
If a bad season is 37 home runs and 94 RBIs, I'll take it. That's a pretty good bad season.